They said Serafina Calloway wouldn't last an hour outside the pack barrier. They said the blizzard of 2019, the worst storm to hit the Bitterroot Mountains in 50 years, would turn her into a frozen monument to her own failure. Her own mate rejected her. Her pack exiled her. She was an Omega, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a death sentence hanging over her head. But when the sun rose over the mountains the next morning, they didn't find a corpse. They found a girl who had walked into a cave of monsters and walked out a queen. This is the true, untold story of how one rejected girl saved the Obsidian Guard, and how, in a single night, the hierarchy of the werewolf world was shattered forever. The archives of the Blackwood Pack in Montana still hold the records of December 21st. It was supposed to be the Silver Solstice Gala, the night the wolves celebrated the longest night of the year. For Serafina Calloway, an Omega who worked in the packhouse kitchens, scrubbing grease traps and mending the Alpha's silk sheets, it was the night her life was supposed to begin. Serafina, or Sarah, as the few who tolerated her whispered, was 22. She was small, with hair the color of wet straw and eyes that were always cast downward. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't rich. But she had a secret. For 3 years, she had been meeting Connor Roche in the shadows behind the generator shed. Connor wasn't just anyone. He was the Alpha heir, the son of Alpha Douglas Roche, a man who ran the Blackwood territory like a military junta. Connor had promised Sarah that the moment the moon hit its zenith on the solstice, he would claim her publicly. He had told her that the mating bond, that biological pull that defies logic, was strong enough to break his father's prejudices. "Wear blue," Connor had whispered to her 2 days prior, pressing a stolen kiss to her palm. "It brings out the gold in your eyes. When I call you up to the dais, I want them to see the future Luna." Sarah had spent her entire savings, money she had scraped together, selling wild herbs to the local human town, on a bolt of cheap blue satin. She had sewn the dress herself by candlelight, pricking her fingers until the hem was stained with tiny, imperceptible dots of her own blood. The night of the gala, the Blackwood Lodge was suffocating with the scent of pine, roasted venison, and expensive perfume. The elite of the Werewolf Society were there. Sarah stood in the back, near the kitchen doors, shivering in her thin satin dress. She wasn't shivering from cold. She was shivering from hope. At midnight, Alpha Douglas Roche banged his cane on the floor. Silence rippled through the hall. "Tonight!" the Alpha boomed, his voice gravelly with age and cruelty. "My son chooses his future. He chooses the strength of our bloodline." Connor stepped forward. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his jawline sharp, his shoulders broad. He scanned the crowd, his eyes locked with Sarah's. For a heartbeat, Sarah's wolf wagged its tail. "This is it," she thought. "He sees me." Connor smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile from the generator shed. It was a cold, practiced grimace. He looked away from her and extended his hand toward the front row. "I choose strength," Connor announced, his voice steady. "I choose lineage. I choose Jessica Pearsall." The room erupted in applause. Jessica, the Beta's daughter, tall, vicious, and wealthy, glided onto the stage. She took Connor's hand, and as she did, Connor looked back at Sarah. He spoke the words that legally shattered a werewolf's soul. "I, Connor Roche, future Alpha of Blackwood, reject you, Serafina Calloway, as my mate." The pain hit Sarah like a physical blow to the sternum. It was the snapping of the bond, a metaphysical severing that felt like a hot wire being ripped out of her chest. She gasped, doubling over, clutching her heart. The room went silent. They all heard the gasp. They all smelled the distress pheromones, acrid and sour. Jessica laughed. It was a high, tinkling sound. "Look at her, Connor. The kitchen rat thought she had a chance." Alpha Douglas didn't laugh. He looked at Sarah with pure disgust. "You dare disrupt this ceremony with your pathetic whining? You, an Omega, thought to trap my son." He promised," Sarah choked out, the humiliation burning hotter than the bond break. Connor stepped to the microphone. "I promised nothing to a bed warmer, and I will not have a delusional Omega stalking me." He looked at his father. "Handle it." Alpha Douglas nodded. "Serafina Calloway, for the crime of attempting to entrap an alpha and disrupting the solstice, you are hereby banished. You have 1 hour to clear the territory." "It's a blizzard," a voice cried out from the back. Old Martha, the head cook, the only person who had ever shown Sarah kindness. "It's 10 below zero. You're sentencing her to death." "Then let the snow bury her," Connor said, turning his back to kiss Jessica. Sarah didn't beg. That was the thing the history books would later note with surprise. She didn't scream. She stood up, her blue dress looking cheap and ridiculous under the chandeliers, and she wiped the tears from her face. She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had used her for comfort while he waited for a better option. "You are right, Connor," Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying in the silence. "The snow covers everything eventually, even rot." She turned and walked out the heavy oak doors into the teeth of the storm. The wind in the Bitterroot Mountains doesn't howl, it screams. By the time Serafina had walked 3 miles, she couldn't feel her feet. The adrenaline of the rejection had worn off, replaced by the lethargic creep of hypothermia. She was wearing a stolen oversized parka she had snagged from the mudroom on her way out. But it was nowhere near enough. The snow was knee-deep and falling in sheets, so thick she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. She was dying. She knew it. The cold was moving from her extremities to her core. Her wolf, weak from the rejection, was curled into a ball in her mind, whimpering. "I will not die on their land," Sarah told herself, forcing one foot in front of the other. "I will not give them the satisfaction of finding my body in the spring within their borders." She pushed toward the dead zone, a stretch of treacherous peaks that marked the edge of Blackwood territory. Even wolves didn't go there. The terrain was too unstable, riddled with hidden crevices and drop-offs. Around 3 a.m., her legs gave out. She collapsed into a snowbank, the world turning grey. As she lay there, waiting for the end, she smelled it. It wasn't the clean scent of snow or pine. It was metallic, copper, blood, and something else. Something distinctly masculine and powerful, like ozone and burning wood. Wolves. Not Blackwood wolves. The scent was different, darker. Against all survival instincts, curiosity, or perhaps destiny, forced her up. She dragged herself toward the scent, crawling over a ridge of jagged slate. There, hidden behind a veil of frozen ivy, was the mouth of a cave. It was massive, a black maw in the white mountainside. The smell of blood was overwhelming now. Sarah stumbled inside, out of the biting wind. The cave was warmer, protected from the gale, but it was dark. She fumbled in her pocket for the small wind-proof lighter she had swiped along with the coat. She flicked it on. The tiny flame illuminated a nightmare. They were everywhere. Massive, hulking shapes scattered across the stone floor. 12 of them. They were in their wolf forms, but these weren't normal wolves. They were gigantic, easily double the size of the average Blackwood shifter. Their fur was matted with ice and fresh blood. Some were black as midnight, others grey as storm clouds. They weren't moving. Sarah froze. If these were rogues, she was dead. If they were a rival pack, she was dead. But they didn't attack. A low whine came from the nearest one, a sleek, russet-colored wolf with a gash running down its flank. Sarah stepped closer, raising the lighter. The scene became clearer. This wasn't a camp. It was a massacre site. They had been ambushed. There were arrows protruding from some of them, silver-tipped arrows, hunter weaponry. They've been poisoned. Her mind registered. The smell of wolf's bane was faint, masking itself under the metallic tang of blood. She should leave. She should walk back out into the snow and let nature take its course. These were strangers. Dangerous strangers. But Serafina Calloway had a defect, one that had made her a terrible Omega, but a decent human being. She couldn't walk away from suffering. She moved to the center of the cave. There, lying on a raised slab of rock, was the biggest wolf of them all. He was obsidian black, a void in the darkness. Even lying prone, he radiated an aura that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. His breathing was shallow, a rattling rasp in his chest. A silver arrow was lodged deep in his shoulder, the skin around it turning a necrotic black. He opened his eyes. They were gold. Not the muddy yellow of normal wolves, but molten, liquid gold. He growled, a sound that vibrated through the floor and into the soles of her boots. It was a warning. "Stay back. I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Though, looking at you, I probably couldn't if I tried." The alpha wolf tried to rise, snapping his jaws at her, but his front leg collapsed. He fell back with a heavy thud, a huff of pain escaping him. Sarah looked around. 12 wolves, all dying. Outside, the storm was burying the entrance. She was trapped in a tomb with a dozen lethal predators. She dropped her backpack, a meager thing containing a change of socks, a bottle of water, and a pouch of dried herbs she used for teas. "Look," she said, addressing the black wolf as if he were a man. "I have wolfsbane extract in my kit. Not the poison, the counter-agent. I use it for arthritis in the elders." The wolf watched her, unblinking. The intelligence in those gold eyes was terrifying. He was assessing her, weighing the risk. "I can pull that arrow," she said, pointing to his shoulder. "But if you bite my head off, we both die. You from the poison, me from, well, decapitation." The black wolf stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. Then, slowly, he laid his massive head back down on his paws and let out a long exhale. He exposed his neck. It was a sign of submission. Or trust. Sarah swallowed hard. She took off her parka, shivering instantly in her thin dress, and rolled up her sleeves. "Okay," she whispered to the darkness. "Let's see if I can survive the night." She didn't know it then, but she wasn't just saving a pack of rogues. She was putting her hands on the Obsidian Guard, the king's own elite executioners, and the black wolf watching her with golden eyes. That was Kiernan Sterling, the Alpha King, the most feared creature on the continent, and he had just seen the face of the woman who would burn the world down for him. If you look at the medical reports from the Royal Infirmary dated 3 days later, they list the injuries the Obsidian Guard sustained during the ambush in the pass. 12 men, the most elite warriors in the supernatural world, brought to their knees by a coordinated strike using military-grade silver and concentrated wolfsbane. By all medical logic, at least 6 of them should have gone into cardiac arrest before dawn. That they didn't is entirely due to the girl who had been told she was worthless her entire life. Inside the cave, the air was thick with the smell of iron and infection. Serafina worked with a focus that bordered on a trance state. She had no medical degree. What she had was 10 years of patching up the Omegas that the Blackwood pack didn't deem worthy of a real doctor. She knew how to stitch skin with a sewing needle and how to draw out fever with snow and moss. She started with the alpha. The black wolf watched her, his breathing labored. The silver arrow in his shoulder was vibrating, a nasty piece of hunter tech designed to burrow deeper with every heartbeat. "This is going to hurt," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. "I need you to hold still. If you thrash, you'll tear the artery." She didn't have anesthesia. She stripped off her scarf, rolled it into a tight bundle, and held it out. "Bite on this." The wolf looked at the bundle, then at her. Slowly, he opened his massive jaws and clamped down on the fabric. Sarah gripped the shaft of the arrow. The skin around it was sizzling, the silver reacting with his lycanthrope biology. She took a breath, planted her boot against the rock slab for leverage, and pulled. A sound tore through the cave. Not a howl, but a strangled, guttural roar that was muffled by the scarf. The wolf's body convulsed, his claws scrabbling against the stone, sparking flint. Sarah didn't let go. She yanked hard, hearing the sickening squelch of flesh, and the arrow came free, black blood gushing in its wake. She immediately packed the wound with the snow she had gathered, mixing it with the dried yarrow and stinging nettle from her pouch to clot the blood. "It's out," she whispered, applying pressure with her own hands, leaning her entire body weight onto the wound to staunch the flow. "You're okay. Stay with me." The alpha's golden eyes rolled back for a moment, then focused on her face. The intensity of that gaze was unnerving. He wasn't just looking at her. He was memorizing her scent, her heartbeat, the fear she was suppressing to save him. Once the bleeding slowed to a sluggish ooze, Sarah moved to the next wolf. And the next. For 6 hours while the blizzard raged outside, burying the world in white, Serafina waged a war against death inside the cave. She moved from wolf to wolf, pulling broken shafts, cleaning gashes with the small bottle of alcohol she had, and binding wounds with strips torn from her own satin dress. By 4:00 a.m., the blue dress was gone. She was left in her slip and the oversized parka, her arms stained to the elbows in blood that wasn't hers. There was a grey wolf, the beta she assumed based on his size, who was seizing from the poison. Sarah didn't have an antidote, but she knew heat helped metabolize the toxin. She dragged the heavy wolf closer to the others, creating a pile of bodies for shared warmth. She rubbed his limbs until her own hands were raw, trying to keep his circulation going. "Come on," she muttered, sweat dripping from her forehead despite the freezing temperature. "You're big and scary. Don't die on me now." The grey wolf's seizing stopped. He chuffed, a weak sound of gratitude, and licked the blood off her hand. Sarah collapsed against the stone wall, her energy reserves completely tapped. She was dehydrated, freezing, and emotionally hollowed out. The adrenaline that had driven her since the rejection ceremony finally evaporated, leaving behind a crushing weight of grief. She pulled her knees to her chest. In the silence of the cave, broken only by the rough breathing of 12 wolves, the reality of her situation hit her. She was mateless, homeless. She had saved these wolves, but come morning, they would leave, or eat her, and she would be left to freeze in the mountains. "I tried, Connor," she whispered into the dark, a tear tracking through the grime on her cheek. "I tried to be what you wanted." A shadow moved. The massive black alpha, the one she had treated first, dragged himself across the floor. He was limping heavily, but he moved with a fluid, lethal grace. He stopped in front of her. Sarah stiffened. "I don't have any food," she murmured. "If that's what you want." The wolf didn't want food. He lowered his massive head and nudged her shoulder. It was a gentle, insistent push. He nudged her again, toward the center of the sleeping pack. He wanted her to join the pile. "I can't," she said. "I'm an Omega. I'm not allowed to sleep with warriors." The wolf let out a low, vibrating growl, not of aggression, but of annoyance. He gripped the hood of her parka in his teeth and gently tugged. Too exhausted to argue, Sarah let him guide her. She crawled into the space between the black wolf and the grey beta. The heat was incredible. It was like stepping into a furnace. The black wolf curled his massive body around her, creating a living wall of fur and muscle between her and the cold cave air. He rested his heavy head on her ankles, effectively pinning her in place. Surrounded by the scent of pine, ozone, and raw power, Serafina Calloway, the rejected girl, the kitchen rat, fell asleep. She didn't know that the wolf acting as her pillow was Kiernan Sterling, the king of the North American Lycanthrope Alliance. And she didn't know that by saving his pack, she had just invoked the life debt, an ancient, unbreakable law that bound his life to hers. While Connor Roche was sleeping in silk sheets with Jessica, thinking he had discarded trash, the most powerful predator on Earth was keeping Syrah warm, listening to her heartbeat, and planning the destruction of anyone who had ever hurt her. The morning sun hit the snow with blinding brilliance. The storm had broken, leaving the Bitterroot Mountains buried under 4 feet of pristine powder. Inside the cave, Serafina woke up to the sound of snapping bone. It was a wet, crunching sound, the sound of anatomy rearranging itself. She shot up, disoriented. The warmth was gone. The fur was gone. She was no longer surrounded by wolves. She was surrounded by 12 naked men. Sarah scrambled back, her back hitting the cold stone wall, clutching the parka tightly around her chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The men were groaning, stretching stiff limbs, checking injuries. They were massive. Even in human form, they were built like tanks, their bodies mapped with old scars and fresh bandages. Her bandages. "Report," a voice commanded. The voice was deep, resonant, and commanded immediate biological obedience. It came from the man standing in the center of the cave. He was tall, well over 6'4", with jet-black hair that fell into his eyes. His skin was tanned, contrasting with the stark white bandages wrapped around his shoulder. He stood completely unashamed of his nudity, radiating an aura of absolute authority. "Poison levels at 15%, Your Majesty," one of the men said, the one who had been the grey wolf. He had a shaved head and a tattoo of a geometric wolf skull on his neck. "We're healing, but we wouldn't have made the night without intervention." "Your Majesty." Sarah's breath hitched. The room went silent. 12 pairs of eyes snapped to her. The black-haired man turned slowly. His eyes were the same molten gold as the wolf's. He looked at her, and the air in the cave seemed to grow heavier, charged with static. He didn't speak immediately. He walked toward her. The other men instinctively parted, lowering their heads in submission as he passed. Sarah wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't work. This man was dangerous. He made Alpha Douglas look like a puppy. He stopped 2 feet from her. He crouched down so they were eye level. Up close, he was devastating. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, and those eyes, ancient and calculating. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed off the walls. Serafina," she stammered. "Serafina Calloway." "Calloway," he tested the name, rolling it around his mouth. "Your Blackwood pack, Douglas Roach's territory." "Not anymore," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I was exiled. Last night." A muscle in the man's jaw ticked. "Exiled? In a blizzard?" I disrupted the solstice, Sarah confessed, feeling the shame wash over her again. My mate, the Alpha heir, he rejected me. I caused a scene. The man went very still. He rejected you? He leaned in closer, inhaling deeply near her neck. Sarah flinched, but he didn't touch her. He was scenting her. I smell the bond break. It's fresh. And I smell grief. He stood up abruptly, turning to his men. Silas, get me pants, and get the girls something to wear that isn't a damn rag. Silas, the bald man, rifled through a waterproof tactical bag that had been recovered from the corner of the cave. He tossed a pair of black cargo pants to the leader and handed Sarah a thick woolen sweater. Put it on, the leader ordered, pulling on his pants. You're shivering. Sarah pulled the sweater over her head. It smelled like him, spiced wood and rain. I'm Kiernan, the man said, turning back to her. He didn't offer a last name. He didn't need to. Sarah's eyes widened. Kiernan Sterling? The Alpha King? The same, he said dryly. And these are the Obsidian Guard. He gestured to the men who were now getting dressed, their movements sharp and military precise. You seem to have a talent for being in the wrong place at the right time, Seraphina. I saw you were hurt, she said. I couldn't leave you. You pulled a silver arrow out of a shifter's shoulder with no gloves, Silas noted, walking over. He looked at Sarah with a strange expression. Respect. Most grown men would have vomited or passed out from the pheromones. You saved the king's life, girl. Kiernan watched her. Why? Why what? Why save us? You're an exiled Omega. We could have been rogues. We could have killed you the moment you walked in. Sarah shrugged, a small, sad movement. I was already dead, Your Majesty. The cold was going to take me anyway. I figured, if I was going to die, I might as well make sure someone else didn't. Kiernan stared at her for a long moment. His golden eyes seemed to strip away her defenses, seeing the broken soul beneath. Then he did something that shocked his men. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused. He brought her knuckles to his lips, brushing a kiss over the dried blood. His blood that still stained her skin. You are not dead, Seraphina, Kiernan said, his voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated in her chest. And you are not exiled. Not anymore. I don't understand, she whispered. The debt is owed, Kiernan stated. The Obsidian Guard pays its debts. He looked at his men. Pack up. We move out in 10. Move out? Sarah asked, panic rising. Where are you going? Not you, Kiernan corrected gently. We. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly. You're coming with us. But I can't leave the territory without permission, or they'll hunt me down as a rogue, she argued, the indoctrination of the pack rules still deep in her mind. Kiernan laughed. It was a dark, terrifying sound. Let them hunt. I dare them. Sir, Silas interrupted, tapping an earpiece he was wearing. We have movement. 2 miles out. Snowmobiles. It's a Blackwood patrol. Sarah froze. They're coming to check for a body, she said, her face paling. Connor, he said the snow would bury me. He wants to make sure I'm dead. Kiernan's expression shifted instantly. The curiosity vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory rage that made the temperature in the cave drop 10 degrees. Is that so? Kiernan murmured. He looked at Sarah. Do you want to see them? No, she said quickly. Please, I just want to go. We will go, Kiernan promised. But first, we are going to send a message. He turned to Silas. Leave the arrow. Sir, leave the silver arrow on the rock slab, Kiernan commanded, and leave my signet ring. Silas's eyes widened. The royal seal? Sir, that's a declaration of war. No, Kiernan said, his eyes locking with Sarah's. It's a declaration of ownership. He turned back to Sarah. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Don't lie to me, Serafina." She bit her lip. "My feet are numb." Before she could react, Kiernan swept her up into his arms. He held her easily, as if she weighed nothing. "Then I carry you," he said. He carried her out of the cave and into the blinding white snow. The obsidian guard formed a protective phalanx around them, 12 lethal warriors moving as one. As they descended the mountain, heading toward the waiting extraction choppers on the other side of the ridge, Sarah rested her head against Kiernan's chest. She could hear his heart beating, strong, steady, and slow. Back at the cave, 10 minutes later, the roar of snowmobiles cut through the silence. Connor Roach, dressed in expensive thermal gear, hopped off his sled. He was accompanied by Jessica and his father, Alpha Douglas. "She should be here," Connor said, kicking at the snow. "She couldn't have gotten far." They entered the cave, flashlights cutting through the gloom. They expected to find a frozen corpse. Instead, they found a bloody rock slab. "What is this?" Alpha Douglas demanded, poking at the dried blood with his cane. "Did a bear get her?" Jessica gasped. She was pointing at the slab. There, resting in a pool of dried blood, was the silver arrowhead, and next to it, glinting in the flashlight beam, was a heavy ring made of black obsidian and gold. Alpha Douglas went pale. He recognized the crest immediately. 2 wolves tearing apart a crown. "The king," he whispered, horror dawning on his face. "Kiernan Sterling was here." Connor frowned. "The king? What does he have to do with the Omega?" Alpha Douglas turned to his son, fear making his voice shake. "You idiot! You rejected a girl who just saved the life of the Alpha King." He looked around the empty cave. The scent of Serafina was mingled heavily with the scent of Kiernan Sterling, a scent mark so strong it was undeniable. "She didn't die," Douglas said, realizing the doom that was about to befall his pack. "She's with him, and God help us when he brings her back." The transition from the freezing mud of the Bitterroot Mountains to the glass and steel skyline of Seattle was jarring. The Obsidian Guard didn't live in a forest. They lived in the penthouse floors of the Sterling Tower, a 90-story skyscraper that dominated the city center. Serafina Calloway, the girl who had spent the last 3 years scrubbing grease traps, now found herself standing in a bathroom larger than her entire childhood dormitory. The fixtures were gold. The towels were Egyptian cotton. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Puget Sound, grey and vast under the winter sky. She hadn't spoken much since the helicopter ride. She was in a state of shock, her mind unable to reconcile the luxury around her with the trauma of the last 24 hours. There was a polite knock on the door. "Enter," she whispered, realizing too late that the thick mahogany door blocked sound. She walked over and opened it. It was Kiernan. He had showered and changed. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit, the bandage on his shoulder hidden beneath the fine wool. He looked less like a wolf and more like a CEO, a predator in a boardroom. "Dr. Aris is here," Kiernan said, his voice low. "He needs to check you over." Sarah instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm fine. I need to work. Is there laundry I can do? Or dishes?" Kiernan's brow furrowed. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Serafina, look at me." She looked up, her blue eyes wide and frightened. "There are staff for the laundry," he said, enunciating each word carefully. "There are machines for the dishes. You are not a servant here. You are a guest of the crown. Do you understand?" "I don't know how to be a guest," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't know what you want from me." Kiernan sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "I want you to heal. That is your only job." The medical exam was brutal. Not physically, but emotionally. Dr. Aris, a kind-faced beta with wire-rimmed glasses, catalogued the damage the Blackwood pack had inflicted over the years. Malnutrition is severe, Aris dictated into his recorder, while Kiernan stood in the corner, his arms crossed, his face a mask of simmering rage. Old fractures in the left radius and right tibia, likely healed without setting, scarring on the back consistent with discipline. Kiernan flinched. Discipline? Whips, Your Majesty, Aris said quietly. Wolfsbane-laced whips. It prevents the omega healing factor from working. Kiernan turned and walked to the window. The glass cracked under his grip. Sarah sat on the exam table, clutching the paper gown. It wasn't that bad, she mumbled, the conditioning of her abuse speaking for her. I was clumsy. I broke plates. You were a child, Kiernan growled, not turning around. They whipped you for breaking plates? It's the Omega's place to serve, she recited the Blackwood motto. Service is survival. Kiernan turned then. The gold in his eyes was swirling with a storm. He walked over to her, ignoring the doctor. He placed his hands on the exam table, trapping her between his arms. Listen to me, he commanded, his voice vibrating with alpha power. That life is over. If anyone in this tower raises a hand to you, I will rip it off. If anyone speaks down to you, I will cut out their tongue. You are under the protection of the Obsidian King. That means you outrank everyone in this city except me. Sarah stared at him. Why? She asked again. It can't just be the life debt. Kiernan looked at her, his gaze softening. He reached out and tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. The touch was electric. Because, he said softly, when I was dying in that cave, you didn't see a king. You didn't see power or status. You saw a soul in pain, and you tried to save it. No one has looked at me like that in 100 years. He straightened up, buttoning his jacket. Rest. Dinner is at 7. And Serafina? Yes? Burn those clothes you came in. I've had a wardrobe sent up. When he left, Sarah looked at the pile of dirty, blood-stained clothes in the corner. Her old life. She walked over, picked them up, and dropped them into the trash chute. For the first time in years, she didn't feel cold. 2 weeks passed. To the outside world, the Alpha King had returned from his hunting trip successfully. The stock market remained stable. The treaties held. But inside the penthouse, a subtle shift was occurring in the hierarchy of the most powerful pack in America. The Obsidian Guard, the 12 men Sarah had saved, had adopted her. It started small. Silas, the bald beta, started leaving protein shakes outside her door in the mornings. You're too skinny, kid, he'd grumble when he passed her in the hall. Can't have the savior looking like a twig. Then it was training. Jax, the pack's enforcer, found her in the gym one night trying to figure out the treadmill. Instead of mocking her, he spent 2 hours teaching her self-defense. Throat, eyes, groin, Jax instructed, holding a punching bag. Omegas aren't strong, so you have to be mean. Hit them where they break. Sarah was learning that the monsters of the Obsidian Guard were actually a family, a dysfunctional, violent, incredibly loyal family, and she was becoming their mascot. But the real change was with Kiernan. He didn't court her with flowers or poems. He courted her with access. He let her sit in on council meetings, sitting quietly in the corner while he eviscerated corrupt politicians. He asked her opinion on pack logistics, food distribution, heating costs, areas where her years of domestic labor gave her practical insight that his generals lacked. She understands the supply chain better than you do, Marcus. Kiernan snapped at his treasurer one afternoon when Sarah pointed out a discrepancy in the grain shipments. Listen to her. The bond between them was growing. It wasn't the instant, slamming impact of a fated mate bond that had been stolen from her by Connor. This was something slower, deeper. It was a bond built on shared trauma and mutual respect. But the ghost of Connor Roche still haunted her. It happened on a Tuesday. Sarah was in the library, reading a book on lichen history, when a wave of nausea hit her. It was a phantom pain, a sharp, stabbing sensation in her chest, right where the mating bond used to be. She doubled over, gasping. "He's with her," her wolf whispered. "He's marking her." Connor was marking Jessica. The final step of the rejection. By taking another mate, he was permanently severing the last psychic thread connecting him to Sarah. It shouldn't have hurt. She hated him. But biology is cruel. Her omega instincts screamed that she was being replaced, that she was unwanted trash. The library door flew open. Kiernan didn't walk in. He blurred in. He was at her side in a microsecond, catching her before she hit the floor. "Sarah!" he barked, his voice frantic. "What is it? Is it the poison? He's marking her," Sarah sobbed, clutching Kiernan's lapels. "It hurts. Make it stop. Please." Kiernan froze. He understood immediately. The rejection sickness. It could kill an Omega if they were weak enough. "I can't stop him," Kiernan growled, his eyes flashing gold. "But I can overwrite him." Sarah looked up, tears blurring her vision. "What?" "The bond is a vacuum," Kiernan explained, his voice rough. "He tore his connection out, leaving a wound. I can fill it, but only if you let me." "How?" "A temporary claim," Kiernan said. "Not a mating, but an energetic link. I tie my life force to yours. I become your anchor until you heal. Will it hurt?" "No," Kiernan whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. "It will feel like coming home." Sarah nodded. "Do it." Kiernan didn't bite her. He placed his hand over her heart, splaying his large fingers across her chest. He closed his eyes and pushed. Sarah gasped. It felt like warm honey was being poured into her veins. The jagged, icy hole that Connor had left was suddenly flooded with liquid gold. She felt Kiernan's strength, his immense, ancient power, flow into her, shoring up her weak wolf, stitching her soul back together. The pain vanished. She took a deep, shuddering breath. For the first time, she could smell him, really smell him. It wasn't just pine and ozone anymore. It was home. It was mine. "Better?" Kiernan asked, his voice strained. He was taking on her pain, absorbing it into his own massive capacity for suffering. "Yes," she whispered. She looked at him, and something shifted. The gratitude turned into something hotter. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was desperate. Kiernan made a low noise in his throat and pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands. He kissed her back with a hunger that told her he had been waiting for this since the cave. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kiernan rested his chin on the top of her head. "Silas just got the intelligence report," Kiernan said, his voice deadly calm. "About what?" "Blackwood," Kiernan said. "They are hosting their mating ceremony in 3 days. Connor and Jessica." Sarah stiffened. "I don't care." "I do," Kiernan said, "because they sent an invitation." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy cream envelope with the Blackwood crest. "They invited the Alpha King. They want to show off their power to the crown. They don't know you are here. They think you're dead." Sarah looked at the envelope. It represented everything she feared. "Do you want to ignore it?" she asked. Kiernan stood up, pulling her with him. He walked her to the mirror. "Look at yourself, Seraphina." She looked. The girl in the mirror wasn't the kitchen rat anymore. She was wearing a silk blouse and tailored trousers. Her hair was shiny, Her skin was glowing with health, and in her eyes, fueled by the king's energy, there was gold flecked in the blue. "They threw you away," Kiernan said, standing behind her, a dark, imposing shadow. "They tried to bury you in the snow. I think it's time we showed them what grew in the winter." He placed his hands on her shoulders. "I am accepting the invitation," Kiernan declared, "and I am bringing a date." Sarah's heart hammered. "You want me to go back to Blackwood?" "I want you to walk through the front door," Kiernan said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I want you to wear the most expensive dress in existence. I want you to wear the royal diamonds. And I want to watch Connor Roche's face when he realizes that the woman he rejected is the woman holding the leash of the Alpha King." Sarah looked at her reflection. She thought of Jessica's laugh. She thought of Connor's cold eyes. She thought of Alpha Douglas's cane. She felt the new bond with Kiernan thrumming in her chest, giving her his courage. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Let's go to a wedding." The night of the Blackwood mating ceremony, the temperature in Montana had stabilized to a crisp 20 degrees. The snow from the blizzard 2 weeks prior had packed down into hard, glistening ice. Inside the Blackwood Lodge, the mood was frantic. Alpha Douglas Roche was sweating through his tuxedo. He had received the confirmation only an hour ago. The king was coming. "Is the wine breathed?" Douglas snapped at a terrified server. "Is the venison rare? If anything is wrong, I'll have your hide." Connor stood by the fireplace, looking miserable. Beside him, Jessica Pearsall was preening in a white lace gown that cost more than most pack members earned in a decade. She was drunk on champagne and victory. "Stop pacing, Connor," Jessica hissed. "So the king is coming. It's an honor. He's coming to bless our union." "He's never visited a remote pack for a ceremony," Connor muttered. "Never. He doesn't leave the Obsidian Citadel unless it's for war or execution. Why is he here?" "Maybe he heard about my beauty," Jessica laughed, tossing her hair. "At 8 Manitowars p.m. Exactly. The heavy oak doors of the lodge didn't just open. They were thrown wide by 2 members of the Obsidian Guard. The room went dead silent. The chatter died. The music stopped. 12 men walked in. They wore matching black tactical suits, formal but lethal. They lined the aisle, creating a corridor of muscle and intimidation. Then Kiernan Sterling entered. He wore a tuxedo that was cut to fit his broad shoulders like a second skin. He radiated power so intense that the weaker wolves in the room involuntarily bared their necks. But no one was looking at the king. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Seraphina Calloway was unrecognizable. Gone was the mousy, hunched girl in the stained apron. In her place was a vision of vengeance. She wore a gown of liquid gold silk that clung to every curve, with a slit that went up to her thigh, revealing a leg smooth and strong. Her hair was swept up in an intricate braid woven with diamonds. But it was her face that stopped Connor's heart. Her chin was high. Her eyes, once always cast down, were sweeping the room with a cold, regal indifference. "Sarah," someone whispered from the back. The whisper turned into a murmur. "It's the Omega. The dead girl. The ghost." Alpha Douglas dropped his cane. It clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. Kiernan ignored them all. He placed his hand on the small of Sarah's back and guided her forward, walking through the crowd as if they were parting the Red Sea. He led her straight to the dais, where Connor and Jessica stood, frozen. Kiernan stopped. He looked at Douglas. "Alpha Roche," Kiernan said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly polite. "You have a lovely home. A bit drafty, though. I recall the last time I was near your territory. I nearly froze to death." Douglas turned a sickly shade of grey. Your Majesty. We didn't know. We thought... You thought a lot of things, Kiernan cut him off. He turned his gaze to Connor. Connor was staring at Sarah. His mouth was slightly open. The bond he had broken was gone, but his eyes were working just fine. He saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and the realization that he had thrown her away for the sharp-faced Jessica was hitting him like a freight train. "Serafina," Connor breathed. "You're alive." "I am," Sarah said. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell in the silent hall. "No thanks to you, Connor." Jessica stepped forward, her face twisting in jealousy. "What are you doing here, you kitchen rat? You are exiled. You have no right to set foot on Blackwood land." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Jessica. She looked at Kiernan. Kiernan smiled, a shark showing its teeth. "She isn't on Blackwood land, Jessica. Wherever the king stands is royal territory, and she is standing with me." Connor stepped down from the dais, ignoring his fiancée. He walked toward Sarah, a look of desperate greed in his eyes. He could smell her now. She smelled like rain, winter, and power. "Sarah," Connor said, putting on his most charming smile. I see you've been taken care of. I'm so relieved. That night, I was distraught. I didn't mean for you to die. It was a test, to see if you were strong enough to be a Luna." The gaslighting was so audacious that the crowd gasped. "A test?" Sarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Connor insisted, stepping closer. "And you passed. You survived. You came back to me." He reached for her hand. "The rejection. We never filed the paperwork with the council. Legally, Sarah, you're still mine. We can fix this. We can..." Snap. The sound of Connor's wrist breaking echoed through the hall. It happened so fast no one saw it. 1 second, Connor was reaching for her. The next, Kiernan had his wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. Connor screamed, dropping to his knees. "Touch her again," Kiernan whispered, leaning down, "and I will peel the skin from your body while you watch." "She's my mate," Connor shrieked, clutching his broken hand. "I have first rights. I didn't finalize the rejection. By the laws of the ancestors, she belongs to the Blackwood pack." Kiernan straightened up, releasing Connor. He looked at the crowd. "First rights," Kiernan mused. "An interesting law. It says that a wolf cannot be claimed by another until the original mate releases them. Is that your argument, boy?" "Yes," Connor yelled, sweat dripping down his face. "She is mine." Kiernan laughed. It was a dark, rumbling sound. "There is a law older than first rights," Kiernan announced, his voice booming. "It is the law of the snow, the law of the debt." He turned to Sarah. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "On the night of the solstice, this pack sentenced this woman to death. You stripped her of her clothes. You stripped her of her rank. You sent her into a storm that killed bears." Kiernan's eyes began to glow, the gold taking over the whites. "She walked into a cave and found 12 dying wolves. She didn't know us. She owed us nothing. But she bled herself dry to keep us alive. She saved the Obsidian Guard. She saved the king." He looked down at Connor, who was whimpering on the floor. "By the ancient laws, a life saved is a life owned. Her life belongs to me because she gave mine back to me. Your claim is null and void, Connor Roche. You rejected an Omega. But I am claiming a queen." The room erupted. "Queen?" Kiernan turned to Sarah. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't the signet ring he had left in the cave. This was a band of white gold, set with a diamond that was so large it looked like a chunk of ice. "Serafina Calloway," Kiernan said, ignoring the chaos around them. You sheltered me when I was weak. You fed me when I was hungry. You were the only light in the darkest night of my life. He slid the ring onto her finger. I, Kiernan Sterling, Alpha of the Obsidian Guard and King of the Lycanthrope Alliance, declare you my Luna, my equal, my wife. Sarah looked at the ring, then at him. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming vindication. I accept, she whispered. Kiernan kissed her. It wasn't a chaste kiss for the audience. It was a claiming. He poured his power into her, and for a moment, Sarah glowed, a visible aura of gold surrounding her body. When they broke apart, Sarah turned to the Blackwood pack. She looked at Alpha Douglas, who was shaking. She looked at Jessica, who was sobbing in humiliation. She looked at Connor, broken on the floor. You said I wouldn't last an hour, Sarah said to Connor. She leaned down, her gold dress pooling around her. You were right. The Seraphina you knew died in the snow. The woman standing here? She smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who finally knew she had teeth. I'm the one who runs the world now. She stood up and turned to Kiernan. I'm ready to go home. Guard, Kiernan barked. We are leaving. What about them? Silas asked, gesturing to the Roche family. Do we execute them for the attempted murder of the future queen? The room held its breath. Sarah looked at them one last time. She saw their fear. She saw their pettiness, and she realized they weren't worth the energy of an execution. No, Sarah said. Let them live. She looked at Connor. Let him live knowing that he traded a queen for a trophy. Let him watch us on the news. Let him see every victory, every child, every happiness I have. That is a worse punishment than death. Kiernan looked at her with undisguised pride. As my Luna commands. They walked out of the lodge, hand in hand, leaving the Blackwood pack in the ruins of their own making. Outside, the snow had started to fall again. But this time, Seraphina Calloway didn't feel the cold. She was wrapped in the warmth of the king, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. The Omega was gone. The Luna had risen. And the world would never be the same. And that, my friends, is the legend of Seraphina Calloway. History books will tell you about the reforms she brought to the Lycan Kingdom, how she outlawed the abuse of Omegas, how she rebuilt the healthcare system, and how the Obsidian Age became known as the Golden Era of Peace. But the real story isn't about politics or power. It's about that one moment in a frozen cave. It's about the choice to be kind when the world has been cruel. It's about the fact that sometimes the very thing that people reject, your softness, your empathy, your heart, is the very thing that makes you a queen. Connor Roche spent the rest of his life watching from the sidelines, a bitter alpha of a failing pack, forever haunted by the gold eyes of the woman he threw away. As for Kiernan and Sarah, well, rumors say that if you hike deep into the Bitterroot Mountains on the winter solstice, you can still see them. Two massive wolves, one black as night and one gold as the sun, running side by side, ruling the wild together. What did you think of Sarah's revenge? Did she let Connor off too easy, or is living with regret the ultimate punishment? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Type Team Execution if you wanted Kiernan to finish him, or Team Mercy if you agree with Sarah. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find more wolf lovers like us. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's saga, The Alpha's Stolen Heir. Until next time, keep howling.